In this video, we're going to look at some common linter rules in Flutter. We're going to write some code and see errors that trigger these rules, and we're going to see how to resolve these errors. So we're going to look at some of these rules, not all of them. We will look at avoid print, avoid unnecessary containers, avoid web libraries in Flutter, prefer const constructors, prefer const literals to create immutables, sort child properties last, use full hex values for Flutter colors, and use key in widget constructors. I'll minimize this image here. Then we'll go over and open the folder that I have created for this project. We'll select this folder. Now we'll go to our terminal and we will use the flutter create command to create a new project. Flutter create demo underscore app. We can see that our project has now been created. So let's go to our main.file to make some changes and then start writing our code. So I'll close this terminal here. Then I'll rename this app. Then I'll remove the comments in this code. And I've also removed some of the code so that now we have a blank scaffold. We'll start by looking at this first rule, which is avoid print. So inside the body property of the scaffold, we will have a centered elevated button. So we'll start with the center widget and its child will be the elevated button. The onPressed property for now will be a blank function, and here is where we are going to look at this linter rule. And the child property will be a text widget that says print to console. So child. Now inside this onPressed property, we're going to write a print function. So this should be lowercase p. And it will print a statement that says this is a print statement. Immediately we can see this blue line, and this means that we have a linter error. And when we hover over it, we can see that the rule that we have violated here is avoid print. For full list of linter rules, you can go to the GitHub repo of flutterlints and check out the flutter.yaml file. So let's go to pub.dev. In this search bar, let's type flutterlints. This first package is what gets added to the project automatically when you use the flutter create command. So we're going to go to the repository here. Inside this lib folder, there is the flutter.yaml file. Now here's where we can see all these rules. Let me zoom in on this window using Control and plus. And here we can see the full list of linter rules that come in the recommended.yaml file. So I'll go ahead and close this window because we already have our list in an image. And the solution for this error is to either use the debug print function instead of the print function. So we'll replace this with debug print. And we see that now our code does not violate that rule. And the reason for this is this debug print function will only work when you're building the app in debug mode, which is what happens by default when you're building apps. So when you build your app in release mode, that is eventually when you want now to release the app, this print function will not work. And that is exactly what Flutter prefer. Because of course the production environment is different from the coding environment. Another solution is to wrap this print function inside an if statement that checks whether you're in debug mode. So here I could have an if statement here. So if k debug mode, and for this to work you need an import at the top here, which could be imported automatically, but if that doesn't happen, you can add it yourself, and that is flutter/foundation.dat. So import. So now if you're in debug mode, then you can print. And this will of course plus the linter test. You could wrap this in curly braces as well. And this code will work just fine. Alternatively, if you are aware that this print statement violates the linter rule, but you'd still like to use it anyway, you can choose to ignore that statement or that linter rule. For that, you put in a comment that says ignore avoid print. And that ignores the line immediately below the comment that has a print function. So if you have another print function, let's say beyond this or below this, so we'll just copy and paste, the second print function will not be ignored. If you, however, want to ignore all the print statements in the entire file, you can use the ignore for file. And any print statement used in this file will be ignored. If you'd like to ignore print statements for the entire project, not just the file, you can go to the analysis options.yml file and scroll to the rules section here, and you can add a line of your own and say avoid print, which is the linter rule, and set it to false. Now if you go back to your main.dat file, even if you get rid of this comment here, you can see that the print statements do not trigger the error. So let me go back and comment this statement here. And if we go back to our main.dat file, we can see that now our code violates the linter rules. So that's it about the avoid print linter rule. Let's now go to the second linter rule. Let's just bring up our image here. And the second one is avoid unnecessary containers. So I'll get rid of the code that we've written here. And now let's go to test code for avoid unnecessary containers. In the body of this scaffold, we will have a simple text widget that says sample text. But we're going to wrap this widget inside a container that performs no special function. So inside the body, we're going to put a container. And the child will be a text widget that says sample text. We'll add the const keyword here. And this const keyword, we are going to look at it also because there is a linter rule that applies to it. Now we can see that we have this blue line, and the linter rule that we have violated is avoid unnecessary containers. There's nothing special about this container, so that's why it is unnecessary. But if we were to give it a color, say red, then now this container performs a function because it wraps the text in a red container. So now we have no error. So that's it for this linter rule. Let's remove this code. Let's now look at the third linter rule, which is avoid web libraries in Flutter. Inside the body of this scaffold, we will have a column with a number of children, and these children will require a web library. So let's create this column. The first child will be a text widget that says window height. The second one will be a text widget that displays the actual window height. But this time we want to use web code or HTML code to get the window height. And to do that, we will need to import the .html package. So let's get rid of this foundation.dat because we do not need it. So import .html. Now this is a web library, and immediately we can see that we have violated this rule, which is avoid web libraries in Flutter. So sometimes you might want to use a library like this, as we are doing in this example, to get window height. And for this, we would use a text widget that displays window, let's use curly braces, window dot inner height. And this function is coming from this .html import. So we're able to access window height through this function. But now the trouble with this is that this is a web-only library. That means if you deploy for a mobile platform like Android or iOS, you're going to have issues with this code because this library will not work in that environment. And so that's why this rule gets triggered. So of course, the solution for this is to find another way around this. For example, we would use media query. In this case, let's just do that. And this would perform the same function, but without requiring a web-only library. So we can get rid of that and get rid of this code here, and we'd still get the same result. So that's it for this avoid web libraries in Flutter rule. So let's get rid of this code that we've just written. And now let's move on to the test code for prefer const constructors. And for this code, we will have a centered container with the color red, or with red as its color, and the child will be a text widget that says sample text. So inside the body, we'll have the centered container. Color will be red, and child will be a text widget. Now we have this blue line here underneath the text widget, and when we hover over it, we can see that the rule we have violated is prefer const constructors. And this is coming up because this widget will not change. This widget remains the same because we have already defined the content of this text widget. And so for that, we need to add a const keyword, and this helps improve the performance of the app. Because what happens is this widget gets created once, and every time the app is refreshed or every time Flutter needs to redraw the interface, it reuses the widget that it created in the beginning. So it does not have to keep building a new widget every time it rebuilds the UI. So that helps with performance. So let's remove this code here and move on to the next linter rule, which is prefer const literals to create immutables. Now for this, we're going to have a column inside the body of the scaffold. And we're going to give this column a direction, right? A vertical direction. Now, to learn more about aspects of the column widget, like vertical direction, you can check out my video on the column widget. So at the top here, we're going to create a vertical direction object. And we're going to pass this in as the vertical direction of this column. Now, inside the children property of this column, we're going to have 3 text widgets. And when we hover over these contents of the children array, we can see that the rule we are violating is prefer const literals to create immutables. And the reason is we have created an array here, but then the contents of this array will never change. So this array is immutable. It will not mutate. And so for this, we need to add the const keyword here to improve performance. Now, of course, this time round, we get the error that we have declared these widgets as constant, yet they are inside a constant array. So, of course, now the solution is to get rid of the const keyword for the text widgets. And so that's how we take care of that linter error. Let's remove the contents of the scaffold here and move on to the next linter rule, which is sort child properties last. Inside the body of this scaffold, we'll have a centered elevated button. Now the child of this elevated button will be a text widget that says sample text. We're going to add a style property to this elevated button. We're going to give it a button style. I have a video on the elevated button, so if you'd like to learn more about that, you can go check that out. And we're going to give it a background color, which will be red. This should be background color. And beyond that, we'll have a blank function in the onPressed property. Now we see that we have an error here. So when we hover over it, we see that the error we have, or the rule we have violated, is sort child properties last. So ideally, in a widget, the child property should be the last property to be defined when you're creating the widget. Of course, here we need to declare this as a constant. And now our error is gone. However, there is an exception to this rule. If you have a property that takes a function, then you can have that property defined after the child property. So for example, this onPressed property takes a function. We could cut it and paste it after the child, and we have not violated the linter rule. But if we were to take this style property, as we had done before, cut it and paste it after the child property, then we have violated the sort child properties last rule. So that's it for this rule. Let's remove this code. Now let's look at the next rule, which is use full hex values for Flutter colors. Inside the body of the scaffold here, we will have a center widget. And inside this center widget, we will have a container. Now, the color of this container will be defined using hex values. So we're going to have a color object here, and we're going to pass in 0xff. This means full color. And the color we could use, say 0088F. Now, if we have over this, we see that we are violating the use full hex values for Flutter colors linter rule. And that's because this is not a full hex digit. This right here is not a full hex digit. It has, as you can see, it has 5 digits in it instead of 6. You will still get a color, although the color you'll get will probably not be what you're looking for. Often you'll get a color that is near transparent with a certain shade. And if you can see here, this is a slightly red shade of color. But if we give it a full hex digit, then we see that our error disappears. So that is good practice. Make sure you use full hex digits when you're defining colors like this. So let's get rid of this code and look at the next linter rule, which is use key in widget constructors. So for this, we're going to create a custom class. We're going to create it before the myApp class. So we'll create a custom class, and we're going to create this class the way default classes are created in Flutter, so that if you use a shortcut to create a class, you will probably get a similar result. So my widget extends stateless widget. So here we'll have the constructor for my widget, which is what we can use inside our code to create an instance of this class. And immediately we see that we have an error here, and that is use key in widget constructors. But before we deal with that, let's first deal with this bigger error, and let's create a concrete implementation of the build method. So here we'll have to annotate the override, and our build method here will return a widget. This build method will take a build context, call it context, and for now let's use a placeholder. This should be small h. Now the only error we have is the fact that we do not have a key in the constructor of an instance of this class. So by default, what happens in Flutter, even when you use a shortcut to create a class, it gets assigned the key inherited from the parent class. So now, since we've assigned a key to this constructor, then our error is gone. So these are the linter rules that you are likely to come across, or your code might at some point violate, and that is how you solve these errors. If you've enjoyed this video and you found value in it, be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might find it useful as well. And if you haven't already, you're very much welcome to subscribe to this channel with the notifications turned on so that you get notified every time I upload a new video.